WWII was the father of the Waffen-SS, a Prussian officer of the old school, disciplined, aggressive, and utterly loyal. In 1941, outside Moscow, a Russian shell fragment had torn through his face and taken his right eye. Now he saw the world through a single lens, and what he saw terrified him. The order in his hand had come directly from Hitler's headquarters, the Wolf's Lair. Hold position. The 7th Army will not retreat. Counterattack immediately. Fuhrer lowered the paper and stared at the map table. The acetate overlay showed the truth. Hitler refused to see. On paper, the German 7th Army looked formidable, 100,000 men, remnants of 4 panzer divisions. In reality, it was trapped. To the north, Canadian forces were driving hard toward Trun. To the south, the American 15th Corps pushed north from Argentan. To the east, the Polish 1st Armored Division was closing the last escape route. The pocket was shrinking. 15 miles wide, 9 miles deep. Hauser did the math. He had 100,000 men, thousands of vehicles, and exactly 1 major road and 3 dirt tracks to get them out. If he obeyed Hitler, the 7th Army would be annihilated where it stood. If he disobeyed, he would have to force an entire army through a gap narrower than a city block under fire from 3 directions. Hauser crushed the telegram in his fist. There was only one decision a rational soldier could make. "We move tonight," he told his staff. "We must reach the Dives River before dawn." The retreat began under torrential rain. By the afternoon of August 17th, the roads leading to Chemboy had become a vision of hell. This was the Wehrmacht, stripped of propaganda. Alongside massive 60-ton Tiger-II tanks crawled horse-drawn wagons loaded with supplies. The German army was a grotesque, hybrid 20th-century armored power strapped to 19th-century logistics. Panic crept in. Men of the 277th Infantry Division marched on rotting boots, eyes fixed not on the road, but on the sky. They feared the Jabos Allied fighter bombers that ruled daylight. Every engine sound froze the column. Thousands of men dove into hedgerows at once. Major Hans von Luck raced up and down the column in his Kubelwagen, screaming orders, trying desperately to separate tanks from horses, trying to keep the arteries of the pocket flowing. "Keep moving," he shouted. "If we stop, we die." The air smelled of wet wool, sweat, hot oil, and manure. Everyone waited for the rockets. Everyone knew they were coming. But 10 miles away, the war looked very different. Inside, the fire direction center of the U.S. 15th Corps, there was no mud, no screaming, no panic. Only silence and calculation. American artillery was not an art. It was an industrial process. Inside a large canvas tent, rows of officers sat at drafting tables. They were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were accountants of destruction. Their uniforms were clean. Coffee steamed beside their maps. Slide rules moved calmly across paper, while Hauser screamed at tank commanders to clear a bridge. An American lieutenant named Parker spoke quietly into a field telephone. "Target 44 Bravo. Crossroads east of Chembois. Enemy armor concentration." He never looked outside. He never saw the enemy. He saw only numbers. Azimuth, elevation, charge. The American system had solved artillery's greatest problem. In the German army, each battery calculated independently. It was slow, fragmented, human. In the American army, the fire direction center centralized everything. One brain controlled 100 guns. The battlefield was treated like a factory floor. The Red Ball Express delivered 20,000 tons of supplies every day. For every shell Hauser could fire, the Americans could fire 50. But volume was not the weapon. Synchronization was time on target hat. This was the moment war stopped being about willpower and became a physics problem. Normally, artillery shells arrived in sequence. The first explosion warned the enemy. They dove for cover. The killing power dropped instantly. Veterans lived by that 10-second window of survival. The Americans erased the window. Parker worked backward from a single moment in time. 155mm guns, 48-second flight time. 105mm howitzers, 18 seconds. 8-inch heavy guns, 35 seconds. If they fired together, shells would arrive separately. Useless. But if each battery fired at a precisely calculated second so that all shells arrived simultaneously, the enemy would have no warning. This required absolute synchronization. Every morning, American artillery officers synchronized their watches to the second using BBC time signals. A 2-second error meant a miss of over 1,000 meters. Precision was non-negotiable. Inside the tent, officers calculated wind drift, temperature effects, barrel expansion, and charge variations. They weren't planning one barrage. They were planning dozens. TOT was not a tactic. It was a rhythm. Fire, reload. Wait 5 minutes. Fire, again different grid. The enemy couldn't adapt, couldn't dig in, could only wait. Hauser's question was tactical. How do I get my men through the gap? Parker's was systemic. How do I ensure no one does, one man thought, in battalions. The other thought, in production schedules. The outcome was already decided. When the order to fire was given, it didn't sound dramatic. To a German observer, it was confusing. Scattered pops, distant thuds, nothing alarming. But high above, something terrifying was happening. Thousands of steel shells, traveling at supersonic speed, were converging on a single point in space and time. They were moving faster than sound itself. On the road near Troon, Hauser wiped rain from his remaining eye. It was quiet, too quiet. The fighter-bombers had grounded due to weather. His men relaxed at a crossroads, eating cold rations. No warning, no whistle. 1,400 hours. In 1 second, over 3,000 shells struck the crossroads. It wasn't a bombardment. It was an erasure. The overpressure wave turned air into a weapon. Lungs ruptured. Eardrums shattered. There was no time to dive, no time to scream. One moment, men were alive, the next, they were simply gone. Then came the second innovation. Variable time fuses. Shells detonated 30 feet above the ground. Foxholes became death traps. Forests turned into shredders of steel and wood. Even Tiger tanks were helpless. As shells exploded directly above their thin engine decks, veterans of the Eastern Front broke down and wept. They could fight men, they could fight tanks, but they could not fight mathematics. The road to Chambord became the corridor of death. Drivers abandoned vehicles only to be annihilated by the next taut volley. Horses panicked, trampling the wounded. The Dives River ran red with blood. American gunners fired until barrel paint peeled away. Trucks backed directly into gun pits, dumping ammunition nonstop. In 24 hours, 80,000 shells fell onto an area the size of Central Park. On August 20th, Hauser himself became just another grid reference. Target 55 Charlie, 16:35 hours. Shrapnel tore through his face and shoulder. The commander of the 7th Army collapsed into the mud, unable to speak, bleeding like any private. By August 21st, the 7th Army ceased to exist. 10,000 dead, 50,000 captured, hundreds of tanks destroyed. When Eisenhower toured the battlefield, he wrote, "It was possible to walk for hundreds of yards, stepping on nothing but dead and decaying flesh." The Falaise Pocket was not a battle. It was an industrial execution. Hauser survived, but he learned the final lesson of modern war. In industrial warfare, courage is just a variable, and against the mathematics of the U.S. Army, that variable was worth 0.